This week on Post Call, the interview is with an upstart dermatology podcast host named Luke Johnson. Did you know at the University of Utah, there's a multimedia studio, and if you want to start a podcast and you're a scientist, you just walk in there and you just record a podcast. Luke's going to tell us about that. Him and I are going to nerd out over Magic the Gathering. You can all totally skip that part, no big deal. Dr. Okamoto has been globetrotting. Not only is she on the other side of the globe, but while over on the other side of the globe, she has been globetrotting further. We're going to talk about new dietary conversations regarding red meat and milk. We're also going to talk about a doctor who got a transplant and talk about what must have been a pretty ironic performance review for a NYU physician. But Emi, welcome back to the, where are you now? Are you back in Cambodia?
Yeah, I'm back. It's good to be back. It's still hot. I miss my 3 cats. So.
Where were you?
Yeah. I was in Bangkok.
Bangkok. Yes. That's in Thailand. That's how you pronounce that.
That was in Thailand. Where they drive on the other side of the road.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I tried to get into the Uber, which they call Grab, and the guy was like, "You're an idiot because you're going into the driver's seat."
Don't get killed by an Uber driver. A GAD? G-A-D?
Grab. Like I'm going to
grab
a car.
Well,
yeah, it's really good because I say the word a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like, can you grab a grab? And I'm like, oh, that sounds so dumb.
Yeah, it's like the Sahara Desert is a redundancy. Did you know that? Sahara is an ancient Arabic word for desert. It's the desert.
Oh.
I know,
all
right?
Well, I don't speak ancient Arabic.
Neither do I, but it's still interesting. Okay, so on this episode of Post Call, like we talked about the intro, Dr. Luke Johnson is our guest. We want to start out, though, with a bit of interesting news. This does happen occasionally. We talked about there was a resident at Hahnemann University Hospital who got a heart. She was a resident, and her attending was like, "Hey, you don't look so good. Sit down real quick." And she woke up, and they're like, "Yeah, you're about to go get a new heart. So just hang tight. You'll have a new heart soon." We have another similar story. The title of this is from the NYU News Hub, the Langone Health News Hub. Leading transplant surgeon accepts a hepatitis C positive heart for himself. There was a quote in here, Emi, that was just too funny. I can't get over it. I just want to think about how performance reviews could have gone had this not worked out so well. Quote, "I actually hired the people that did my transplant, not knowing they'd be saving my life at some point." What an interesting story.
Who can say that? Not me. Hopefully never me. I don't know.
Never me.
But yeah, and it was just a crazy story. I read it in also in like the NYU alumni thing. Just he was traveling, he was on the other side of the world, and all of a sudden he's like, "Oh no, I got to get back to New York right now," and rushed back and had a transplant by his colleagues and his team. Yeah.
Which is, and that's a half of it. The other half of it is that it's a hepatitis C positive organ, which I'm not as familiar with the history regarding like what protocol and what's happened with those tissues. But from what I understand, that there's been some movement in the last 10 years or so. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, a ton of movement is that we can now treat hepatitis C. So whereas we used to discard these organs, which are life-saving organs, we started by giving them to people with hepatitis C already, because if they're already infected, why not give them an infected organ? And there was a lot of studies around that. And now it's, well, can you give an infected organ to a non-infected person if we can treat the disease so easily?
Makes total sense to me. And if you were the person who, like, man, I would take Hep C to have a liver or a kidney or a heart. Totally. Just sign me up. Yes. Totally.
Yeah, these are not easy organs to come by.
No, and I'm a transplant recipient. I'm a partial transplant recipient, and I can say that I'd rather the person was alive, but it is unspeakable what it means to go through that, to be honest with you. I try not to think about it because it's just such a brain teaser of like emotion and weirdness. So 100%, I'm really glad that this is happening. And what a cool, I just can't get over that. I hired the people that did my transplant.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Yeah.
No pressure, kids. Okay, so I want to talk about dietary guidelines and recommendations. 2 interesting studies reported by both MD Edge and Medscape. Obviously, MD Edge and Medscape, as we've mentioned before, owned by the same parent company. Want to start with children. New kids guidelines: drink milk, water, avoid plant-based milk, quote unquote. And I mean, this is about avoiding sugary drinks and when can you drink this and when can you drink that, and the recommendations when to introduce stuff. But you had questions about some of the data and some of the citations as to why milk was being recommended versus why it wasn't.
Yeah, it's good. You look at these things and it comes out and it's saying, cow milk is the way to go, that and water, which just makes you pause for a second because it's like, wait, where have I seen really good data about this? And this is coming out from the American Heart Association, from the American Academy of Pediatrics, Nutrition and Dietetics. So you go in and you look at the data, and the evidence for recommending milk for ages 2 to 5 is a study done by the dairy industry, and then a study done that says of all the foods we eat and kids eat, milk has the most nutrients for them, and that's the evidence. But that's like saying, imagine if we ate cheeseburgers every day, and it turned out that cheeseburgers have, all the essential nutrients. So we should continue eating cheeseburgers every day.
Right. Yeah. I have a similar argument with my girlfriend on a pretty regular basis. I believe that my corner store hoagie has an adequate amount of vegetables that definitely count for at least 2 servings of vegetables. And so as a result of that, a hoagie is a perfectly balanced meal. I lose that argument.
Yes, that's what this report is saying. Yeah, which I'm not saying that milk isn't the answer, but we just don't have that data. And so coming out very strong to say that is something we just have to look at twice.
Yeah, and the 2 real takeaways here for me are, one, look at the data. Obviously, Medscape and MD Edge will cite the reports and the meetings and the abstracts and the peer-reviewed data in the article. You can click to it in the article. Also, you want to be semi-aware of who's being paid by whom and who published what, because it's obvious, of course, hey, the milk industry says, look, it's good to drink milk. That's not even my takeaway. My takeaway is those who produce milk are saying it's not as bad as Dr. Pepper, which is true, but there's not a lot of data on the other side. So it's good to be skeptical, and it's also good to look into what's going on behind the curtains, and then this can impact conversations that you'd have with if you were treating adolescents or pediatric patients, or maybe women who are pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant, about what's going to happen. So this needs to be taken with a grain of salt and needs to be dived a little deeper into.
Yeah. And then we had another recommendation come out.
Yes, we did.
All the vegans out there are not doing so hot with these recommendations.
No, they are not. So the title of this one, and this is real, red meat is okay. New guideline, but critics, including Dr. Okamoto, call foul. We covered this in the Daily Medical News a couple episodes back. Obviously, the Daily Medical News, 10 minutes to keep you up to date on all the latest clinical medicine information. Great way to start your day, if I don't mind saying so myself. But it's always a mantra growing up that, red meat, cholesterol, all of this stuff. This is a meta-analysis that showed that actually cancer, cardiovascular disease, perhaps not a risk, but there are some questions about the way things are going down.
Yeah, and it's an interesting study. It gets published in the American College of Physicians, which is actually what I and a lot of it's the biggest advocacy group, mostly internists, and they're going ahead and saying that it's low certainty, low quality evidence, but that Americans don't need to change their diet habits, which just kind of throws it in the face of everything we've been saying about reduce your red meat intake, reduce your processed meat. And it all hinges on the fact that, what evidence do we believe? Because they come in with randomized control trials to study people's diet that last mostly, a few years to look at events and then say, look, there wasn't really that much difference between people who reduced red meat and didn't. Whereas we have a lot of other observational studies with red meat showing that, there is what seems to be a pretty strong association. So it's where do you get your data from for nutrition studies? Because these are things that are cumulative over a lifetime.
Right.
And really hard to study.
Yeah, and it's weird because the confounders for me immediately that you think about lifestyle stuff. So those who are eating that amount of red meat and then were in a study to reduce it or not reduce it, perhaps would have started the study at a higher risk for the fact that they were being studied compared with a well-balanced diet. I thought that this quote was interesting from the American Cancer Society. I love metaphors and analogies and all of that kind of wordplay. They said it's like saying it's safe to ride your bike without a helmet, despite there being clear evidence that there's a risk, which is interesting because I bet the more often you ride your bike without a helmet, maybe you're going to be okay. When you're not okay, it's going to be really bad, I thought that was a really good metaphor.
Yeah, and it's saying that's something we know we've all come to accept. And even in their paper on cancer, they say dose response meta-analysis results provide low certainty evidence that decreasing unprocessed red meat intake may result in a small reduction. So 7 fewer events per 1,000 persons. So there was evidence that you decrease cancer. It's, processed meats is a WHO carcinogen. So it's just interesting to see them come out and say something like this.
Yeah, and there were some pretty hard and fast quotes that came out of that. You can find a link to this. We're reading the Medscape article. The MDH article is available in the show notes as well. Look, data is data. And if this is what was published and reviewed, and this is in the Annals of Internal Medicine, then this is something to consider, but it doesn't paint the whole picture. And we know that to be true with any study, as long as just another thing to pile on top of the mountain of evidence to help people treat their patients and live their lives day to day. And something else that's going to help you treat your patients and live your life day to day, the electronic health/medical record system. So I was stumbling around medical Reddit, which is a great thread. If any of you are not interested or are interested in social media, Reddit can be completely anonymous. You get accepted into the medicine group. And it's just basically like Twitter and blogs. It's just a bunch of words, people talking about, whatever. So this question is, what single feature would you want brought into the EMR the most? The first response that got the most responses was, it should be easier to tell who wrote each note. When a level 1 trauma comes in and gets submitted for 5 days, there are literally over 100 notes. They should be color-coded and have thumbnail icons to distinguish who wrote them. What feature would you add to the EMR?
Yeah, and I like that one so much because then they go on to say like the thumbnail would be like a scalpel and an eye would be ophtho, or a scalpel and a brain, would be your neurosurgeon. And then you'd use a stethoscope and a brain would be your neurologist, or a stethoscope and a kidney would be your nephrologist. So just really cute. I like little pictograms.
It's really interesting you say that. So when I worked as an Epic administrator at the Thomas Jefferson University Health System, there are metaphors within the system like that. Like they called pharmacy Willow. This is like how old pharmacy, getting your roots and your herbs and stuff. They called, I forget all the different names, but they did that. It was really kind of cool. Unless you didn't know what it was, and then you thought, you were on like some sort of message board for fantasy. You know what I mean? But I like that too. Everybody's got an icon. It's clear. And
it's not clear at all because you're just scrolling through and you're like, oh my gosh, why is this taking me so long to find like one note that I want to read?
Completely agree.
I'm totally for that.
What would you add to the EMR?
Yeah, well then the next upvoted one, which I really like, is create a custom rounding sheet, because we just use Epic for writing notes, putting in orders, but there's so much of our workflow that's not reflected in the medical record system. So I really want to see it easier to do patient handoffs, to do rounding, to do tasks that we already do that aren't directly involved in billing, but are directly involved in patient care. So we need to see that reflected in Epic and in whatever system we're moving towards next. Hopefully that has a lot of improvements.
Yeah, so I think the next big hurdle will be, or big achievement will be, turning the information that is submitted into Epic or whatever system that is being used at your particular institution into being dynamic. So not only is it a record and is it billable, which has to happen in our current system or whatever, but turning that into being a tool, not just a record, but a tool. So that would be a good one. This was already happening. This is another one further down the thread. I want Dragon to integrate with EMR and be like Google and Siri and listen to conversations in the room and be smart enough to chart through and draft high points of visit and prepare a template of orders, et cetera, et cetera. You can edit it. That would be great. FYI, people are working on that, but the bad news is they've been working on it for a while. So until Mark Zuckerberg, Bezos, Sergey Brin, Larry Ellison, they get on it, I don't know if it's going to happen anytime soon, but I think that's where we're going. And a lot of ethical questions, but how great would it be for that to be the case? And then, maybe the patient could just ask their Alexa, hey, when should I take, when can I take my medication?
A little terrifying. I'd rather not think about it.
Yes. When Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates are like, hey, stop this artificial intelligence crap right now, and we're not joking, stop it right now, then maybe we should pay attention, but that's just me.
Yeah.
So
Scary stuff.
And then you can find a link to the Reddit, of course, in the podcast notes. I can't say enough about medical Reddit. There's just such good conversations. Next time we're going...
And Reddit in general.
Reddit's great, yeah.
Animal text gifts.
Yeah, I love me some Reddit. I used to be, when I would watch sports games, I would get on Twitter, but then it's people are just trying to score points and stuff. Reddit, people are just genuinely saying what they think, and it's just so great. Next week, I have an article that I found on medical Reddit. I think we might integrate this as a tool for us later on. Why Amazon's healthcare model for local employees in Seattle could be a new model for other large corporate healthcare systems. I know that in Philly that rings true to me because huge portions of the economy in this town are because Comcast's world headquarters are here, and then there are plenty of cities that are like that as well. So we'll talk about new healthcare systems and just chit-chat about that article next week. But let's talk about the guest. So how great would it be, and I can say this for myself because I know the equipment, I've been in the business for a long time, but I always try to encourage people to start podcasts, but Dr. Luke Johnson at the University of Utah has a sweet setup. He can just go in to this library and there's a one-touch record. So if you bring your USB flash drive or an SD card, you walk into the studio and you're allotted time and you press a button and then you're recording a podcast. So I love this from his institution, and I love that he checked out the dermatology podcast space, said to himself, hey, I think there should be something like this. I'm going to start it.
Yeah, and it's that's how easy it is. Then you have to deal with, what are you going to do, your branding, your marketing, but just put yourself out there and see what it's like. I think it's a lot of fun.
Yep. So Dr. Johnson, and a little teaser, it's possible we are just kind of chit-chatting about what it would be like for Dr. Johnson to appear on an episode of our sister program, Dermatology Weekly. Those conversations are ongoing. We'll see what happens. But I hope you enjoy this interview with Dr. Luke Johnson. And next time Emi winds up in Helsinki or Belize or wherever she's going, we'll be sure that she checks
Rwanda.
Yeah, Rwanda. Oh, see, that one was real.
Yeah, that one was real. Yeah. So see you there.
Yep, I will not see you there. It felt like we were in Rwanda today. As we record this, it was that heat wave. It was 93 degrees with 80% humidity today. What the F?
Oh my gosh, what is it? October.
Yeah, I did not love it. But so coming up next to my interview with Dr. Luke Johnson. Next week, we're talking about the Amazon article and more from around the world of medicine and healthcare. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Post Call Podcast. Welcome back to the Post Call Podcast. I am joined by Dr. Luke Johnson, who is the creator, founder, CEO, president, chair of the board of a new podcast called Dermasphere, which is all about dermatology. It is essentially, I like to boil it down as a little bit more than a podcast journal club for dermatology. So welcome, Dr. Johnson. And did I get it right? Is that about what Dermasphere is?
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. I like to say Dermasphere is a podcast by dermatologists for dermatologists and for the dermatologically curious. Uh-huh. We review a lot of the recent literature that's come out about dermatology because I don't have time to read a lot of it, but I'm hoping that our listeners may trust me and my co-host to figure out the best articles and review them for them.
So do you have any selection process on the articles? Is it immediate clinical relevance, or is there any sort of parameters about just maybe interesting science, or what? How do you choose?
So my goal is to pick articles that are most relevant to or not necessarily dermatologists, but people practicing dermatology in active clinical practice. So I like best the articles that I could use that would change my clinic day tomorrow. We also review a few articles that are sort of interesting because, people like interesting things.
Yeah. So you have a co-host. Who's your co-host?
My co-host is Michelle Tarbox. She is a assistant professor of dermatology at Texas Tech, which is where I did my residency. So that's how we know each other. And she's awesome.
So the way I understand, so I've been doing audio and podcasting and live and TV here and there for about 12 years. And what I understand about the podcast space is that people often find either they have something to say or they wish someone else was saying something and they just take it upon themselves to do that. And your show is a little bit of both of those things. Yeah. How did you get the motivation and what sparked the ability to host and publish it and kind of develop your show?
Well, it was mostly the second. So I wanted something like this to exist. And I looked around and there were some other dermatology podcasts out there, including the excellent Dermatology Weekly that MD Edge produces. And none of them did exactly what I was hoping I would find. So decided that I would make it. And I've got to give a lot of kudos to the University of Utah, which is where I am employed, for encouraging this sort of activity and protecting my time so that I can engage in such things.
Yeah, and I first of all, I am from that neck of the woods. I was born and raised in Southwest Wyoming, in the Utah corner of Wyoming, so I've been to Salt Lake thousands of times, and I love it. University of Utah, the campus, the medical campus, is just astounding on the hill, and what a view, and a lot of support financially. It seems like a really great place to do what you're doing.
Seems really nice overall. It's hard for me to speak to the institution as a whole because, you're just one little piece of it. But the Department of Dermatology is certainly excellent. Yeah.
Well, you also have at the University of Utah, they do really good with media, and you have a studio that is dedicated to things like this, and they're enabling you, and they want you to get your message out and participate in media in this way. So what tools do they provide?
Yeah, that's pretty neat. So there is a specific health sciences library here on campus, and they have what they refer to as the Tree of Hippocrates Education Studio. So it's an audiovisual studio. I'm sitting in it right now. And they have various stuff with flashing lights and dials and cables and things. What I use is a nice microphone and big earphones. Sure. So I feel legit. It's mostly so that I feel legit.
That's important.
And then they have audio editing software. They also have a bunch of video stuff, which I don't use, at least not yet.
Yeah, one day.
Other students and so on could potentially create videos and things. And then they recently put in a bunch of soundproofing.
Oh, wow. That's nice. It's like legit.
Yeah, it feels like I'm in a submarine or something.
So I imagine, I know when I answer emails or get on Twitter and kind of help people talk about starting their own show, that one of the big barriers is the technical stuff and then how to host it. And how have you navigated the software side and picking a host and picking a logo and maybe music and your co-host, and how long did that take? And at any point did you kind of back off wanting to do it, or you think maybe this is too much work?
So it took a few months, but I'm a pretty young attending. I mean, not young age-wise. There's some gray in my hair now, but young in terms of being out of training. And what I have discovered in my brief time is that if something needs other humans to happen, it takes a long, long time. And if something needs only me, then it can happen in not too long of a time.
Sure.
So a few months, I think, is not too bad. I had to teach myself a lot of this stuff. I use the Anchor distribution, so shout out to them. They're a nice way to start a podcast, sure, and then they distribute it to all the major podcast platforms, and it doesn't cost any money. So that part's real nice. And they have a series of little podcasts that say sort of how to start a podcast, which gave me some ideas. The studio here is a nice place to record. The first couple sort of demo episodes that we did, I didn't access it, or we were having technical problems or something. So I just recorded off my phone in the car and some things like that. And, it wasn't actually all that bad, but certainly the sound quality is better in the studio, I think.
Yeah.
Music. So I decided to play a little bit of music before and after. And YouTube has a large library of free, like not copywritten stuff that the creators very kindly put up there for people to use in projects such as this. So I listened to a bunch of those and settled on one that I liked. I think the artist is Jingle Punks, so shout out to them. And the logo, so the University of Utah, and I assume most other universities, provide you access to some software that you might not otherwise have. So got on Photoshop and found some, again, free piece of art, just like kind of a little sphere looking thing. I changed the color a little bit and I wrote Dermasphere in front of it and decided it was now our logo.
Yeah, there you go. Now you're an artist. That's really good advice. You can pay for $50, $70 to own licensing in different loops of beats. But also, I really like the idea of going to those free libraries like YouTube and kind of promote an artist. And I always try to stay in touch with them and say, hey, your thing was selected and really appreciate using it. And that's really cool.
Yeah, I should probably say that to Jingle Punks.
Yeah.
And another shout out, I'm doing a lot of shout outs on this podcast, to the University of Utah, because it was some of their IT guys that pointed me in these directions to things like Anchor and the YouTube library and so on.
Yeah, Anchor's a good one. If anybody's curious, MD Edge Family is hosted by Libsyn, and they're an industry expert. Anchor, Blueberry, all of them very similar. They're going to compete for your business, but that's where you start if you're curious about how to start a podcast. I know a lot of people want to do YouTube or SoundCloud. That's not the same thing. You definitely want to go with one of a syndicator or a host. Those are the words you want to type in when you're searching for it. So that's all. You're taking all of the appropriate steps. Now you kind of had an idea of what format you wanted to do. You wanted this to exist, so you're putting out the thing that you wish had existed. You find someone to talk to. You're getting it all going. But it never goes the way you think it's going to go until you turn the mics on and edit it. So I imagine the first couple episodes, you stumble here, you find that this works, you find that doesn't work. How has that creative process been, and what are you doing to improve and grow?
So I used to be what I would call a creative type. I was a writer and editor for Dungeons and Dragons and similar games before I went to medical school. And when I was originally in college, I avoided all the hard sciences because I thought, I am an artiste. I do not need to dissect anything. Of course, that came back to bite me. But this has been real nice in that it's been another creative outlet. So the whole business of teaching myself how to do it and then sorting out the kinks, and now I feel like it's got a little bit of momentum behind it, has been pretty fun for the most part. I thought Michelle, Dr. Tarbox, would be a great co-host. I didn't think she would actually be able to, just because she's very busy. So I was very pleased when she agreed to come on. And one other thing I wanted to mention was the website business. So we have a website, that dermaspherepodcast.com. So Dermasphere is DERMA sphere podcast.com. And I had to teach myself some rudimentary web design and stuff. So I had to look into the best ways to do that. And if we put all our audio on there, you have to have an audio hosting ability as well. So all of that stuff that you can sort out by spending some time and some Google searches and talking to some other people.
Yeah, and if you have a creative side at all, you can find yourself kind of going down the rabbit hole with that for sure.
You can, and you also have to balance it against the time and the rest of your life. So I decided to make the show ostensibly a live show, a little bit of music at the beginning, a little bit of music at the end, but otherwise I don't do any sound editing. So This is not a slick kind of NPR post-produced thing, but I like to think it's part of our charm.
I appreciate those because, and this is a concept, I think I've mentioned it on this show before, but part of what you're selling or providing, or I guess the argument that you're making for your audience to join you, is the information and the practicality of that information. But the other thing that you're providing is a seat at the table. It's not broadcasting, it's narrowcasting, which is a bunch of individual people who are joining you. So that's not, 20,000 people who would potentially be listening, but 20,000 different one-on-one conversations, which is really great. It makes you feel like you're participating in the conversation, which is a completely different way to learn and ingest information, as we all know, that's one of the beautiful things about podcasting. So one of the things I like about medical podcasting is it's not just bantery stuff. It's not just entertaining. It can also be that. But because people have such little time, specifically if you're a clinician, or if you're treating patients or doing research or studying, if you have such little time, this is a really practical way to envelop yourself in your career and in your passion while also working out or driving or walking around and not just blasting music, which is something that I really love. So you're providing, I've listened to episodes of the show, obviously, a very conversational tone, but there's a lot of really practical information in there. So I'm really happy to have you guys in the space.
Thanks. Yeah, that's our goal, to make it informative and also entertaining enough that you feel like you want to listen to it and it's not too dry. So Michelle and I are both like theater people. We like dumb jokes, and so those come up a fair amount, but I like to think that they don't overwhelm the good information that you're getting that can help you in your clinical practice.
Sure. So let's talk about podcast format inspiration. So I know that you listen to Dermatology Weekly because you told us. And
it's true.
Yeah. And now but do you have any other medical or scientific inspirations, and then any other podcast inspirations maybe outside the niche?
So I have to admit that I kind of based this podcast on a podcast that I listen to about one of my hobbies. So I am a nerd. I like nerdy board games and nerdy card games and things. And there's one of those that I've been listening to for years where they talk about one of these games, and it's two people who basically have conversations about the game and new elements of the game that come out. And
sure.
I've always enjoyed it. And just as you said, it feels like you're kind of hanging out with them while they talk about things, and you're getting some entertainment and you're getting some information. And it allows me to feel like I'm stay connected to that hobby, even though I don't get to actively engage in it very much. And, I feel like I kind of modeled our podcast after that.
Hey, that's the best way to do it. So which game is this?
This is a card game called Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, you don't have to explain to me. I listen to Empty Goldfish.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
So the one I listen to is Limited Resources.
Oh, of course. Yeah, they're good in the space. I am a nerd as well. Magic is great. But I'm not a very high level player. For those of you that know and have not tuned us out already, I play Standard mostly and Draft, but yeah, that is what it is.
Good man. Yeah. I like Draft as well, and just sort of casual sitting around the table stuff.
Yeah, no, that's the best way to do it, like you're in a coffee shop or whatever. And so that's why I sort of considered you guys like a bit of a journal club. It's not that in the same way, but it's two people who are theoretically coming out with, hey, did you see this? Hey, did you see that? And then going through it for practical information and for enlightening information and talking about it. Like, say, if you and I met at a coffee shop for an hour to talk about what's in the literature this week.
One of the things I found that's a little bit potentially strange is that I find myself looking forward to my own podcast being released. Obviously, I know what's on it because I recorded it, but I just enjoy listening to it. So that's probably a certain degree of narcissism, and also indicates, hopefully, that I have created what I was hoping to create, which is appealing to me, and
sure.
I hope is appealing to other people out there too.
Well, that is a remarkable level of self-confidence, just because, in my experience, everybody hates the sound of their own voice, which is so tough to get over once you listen to yourself.
Well, I have a brother, and he sounds a lot like me, so maybe
go.
I've been hearing him for years and years.
Okay, so we talked about Dermatology Weekly, and now I wanted to play a game with you. I think that we are considering...
is the game Magic? Let's play.
We can definitely play Magic. I must admit that I would like to go first. I'm not very good.
That's fair.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so what I have is from Dermatology, MDH Dermatology. We're going to take a quiz. We mentioned Dermatology Weekly, our sister podcast, and Dr. Johnson is a listener. This is the kind of thing that you would know if you read MDH.com or if you listen to Dermatology Weekly, the podcast. And I think it's possible we're going to hear Dr. Johnson on an episode of Dermatology Weekly in the near or not so near future, sometime probably this fall. Okay, so let's go ahead and take this quiz.
I'm going to embarrass myself.
I haven't done it either, and I work at the company, so let's see how it goes. Question number 1. Google's artificial intelligence system can reportedly detect blank skin conditions when presented with images and metadata about a patient case. So it's how many skin conditions can Google's AI system reportedly detect? Is it A, 6, B, 15, C, 26, or D, 42?
B,
15.
Seems like a good average number.
Close.
Ouch.
It's the other middle. Yeah. The answer is C26. And that was the most common response, but the second most common response, actually the most common response was 42. You can read, of course,
people are a lot of confidence in Google.
Well, I think that, I think you're right about that, which is alarming, I suppose. Right? I mean, they can't do everything.
Not to take this too far on a tangent, but this business of artificial intelligence and deep neural networks and stuff is becoming a big deal in medicine and dermatology in particular, because the lay press has picked this up too. So some of your listeners might have seen stories that computers can detect melanoma easily or better than dermatologists in some cases. So in some ways, dermatologists look at stuff like that and say, ooh, that's kind of scary. But really what I think it's going to do is make our jobs more important and also more difficult, because our patients are going to start coming in with these lesions that say, my computer told me that they couldn't quite tell if this was a melanoma or not. So I need, you to do that. And that's going to be real hard for us.
Yeah, but I agree, and not to enable your tangent, but I also think it's just another tool in the toolbox to say, like, this is what this model has shown, but also, individualized medicine, as we know, is so important.
All right, I won't add anything more to avoid continued tangents.
Also to avoid Google getting mad at us for talking crap on AI. Okay, here we go. Question number 2. Which of the following factors may increase the risk of individuals with psoriasis going on to develop psoriatic arthritis, according to a new study that was published in the British Journal of Dermatology? Is it
I know this one because we reviewed it on Dermasphere.
All right,
it's a higher BMI.
Oh, that is correct. I didn't even have to give you the multiple choice.
Hooray!
So what episode of Dermasphere is that on?
Oh, man, I'd have to look it up.
Well, I will look it up because I'm a producer, and we'll put a link to it, of course, in the podcast notes of Post Call. Okay, so you're 1 for 2. I find that people often get 80% here, so if you run the table, you can get 80%. But this is a tough one. True or false questions are always the worst. Question 3, true or false? Children with juvenile dermatomyositis. Oh, did I mispronounce it? Dermatomyositis.
Dermatomyositis, yes.
Dermatomyositis. It's the T's, man. I always underpronounce T's. All right. True or false? Children with juvenile dermatomyositis shows significant growth failure and puber. Wow, I'm going to start this whole thing again. Let me mark that up. Question number 3, true or false? Children with juvenile dermatomyositis showed significant growth failure and pubertal delay in a recent study. Is that true or false?
False. Ouch.
Unfortunately, that is not correct. Overall, researchers identified growth failure, height deflection, and or delayed puberty in 94 children. That's 48% in the last study visit of the trial.
Told you I was going to embarrass myself.
No, that's okay. All you need to do is make sure that you go to mdh.com/dermatology. Shameless plug. What can I say?
Yeah, we should maybe review that one.
That's a good idea. Hey, how about that? Question 4 of 5. Reuters linked a U.S. judge on Thursday to unsealed documents filed in court regarding potential risks associated for a popular treatment option for A, eczema, B, hair loss, C, rosacea.
Hair loss. All right.
I don't
know what it was, though.
Let's see. Reuters. The motion was filed in a federal court in Brooklyn after Reuters article on Wednesday revealed accusations that Merck did not fully disclose on Propitia's label the incidence and duration of sexual dysfunction in men who took Propecia in clinical trials.
I don't like this because we actually reviewed a nice article about this issue in one of the early episodes of Dermasphere, and it looks like Propecia, which is finasteride, doesn't really cause sexual side effects. So 2 sides to this one.
That is really interesting. What episode of that on? And I'm asking as a patient because I take finasteride for hair loss.
It's one of the early ones. I think it might be number 2.
I'm gonna have to listen to that just to stay informed as a patient, because I will say this, not to go on a tangent on my own. Being able to get that delivered to my house is convenient, but a little weird for me.
Fair.
But I mean, not that I don't trust it, but it's just kind of the days that we live in, I suppose. All right.
Yeah. Next time it'll be drones just flying it directly into your bathroom and putting it next to your sink.
I know. It's just
carefully rearranging everything and then flying out.
I know, which would, honestly, if they cleaned my house, I would not hate that. What am I going to say? All right. Question number 5. This is for a winning record. True or false? Using laser and light sources is emerging as a promising treatment option for non-aggressive basal cell carcinoma. Is that true or is that false?
Well, you could definitely use them. So I guess I would say it's true. I don't know if I would describe it as emerging since it's kind of been around for a while.
All right, so go off on that. Let me see. What do you mean?
So there's a number of different lasers and light sources. We call them things like photodynamic therapy, where you put a medicine on the skin cancer and then the cells absorb it over an hour or two or even more. And then you shine a special wavelength of light on it, which causes the whole thing to activate. And it's a pretty decent option for some of these mild skin cancers. I've used it a couple times on some patients.
So you can learn that kind of thing and more by listening to the Dermasphere podcast. We had questions where you had already reviewed and been on the ball. So obviously, if you are interested in dermatology, if you're a med student, or you're considering matching into or applying for a dermatology resident, Dermasphere obviously makes a bunch of sense. And if you're a dermatologist, obviously you'd want to stay up to date because the quiz covered ground that you had already covered. So you got 3 out of 5. How do you feel?
Decent.
So
if any of you guys are med students and interested in applying to dermatology, apply to the U.
The U.
We love meeting people at the University of Utah. We call it the U. There's a big U on the mountain. What can I say?
Yeah. So for those of you that know about the University of Miami, they put their thumbs together with their palms up, right? But the U is just your index fingers. Is that right?
That is correct, though I only saw that for the first time a couple years ago, so I feel like that's a new thing.
That's all about the U. Okay, so speaking of the U, let's get to know you a little better. Just bullet points. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to undergrad? Where'd you go to med school? Why'd you choose dermatology?
I was born outside of Seattle. My parents moved to Salt Lake City when I was about 6 years old. I grew up in Salt Lake City. I went to college at a little undergrad called Westminster College. And then I moved to Orlando, Florida for a year and a half to teach game design at a college down there. And then I decided I could do game design full-time, freelance, so moved back to Salt Lake to be close to my family, where I just sort of worked out of my living room or the local coffee shops for a while. Then I decided to go to medical school. I originally decided to go to medical school to become a pediatric psychiatrist, and had to retake a bunch of undergrad courses that I intentionally had avoided, as I mentioned. Decided that there was a lot of stuff out there that was cool than just psychiatry, so went to med school with a pretty open mind. Went to med school at the University of Pittsburgh. Went to dermatology residency at Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas. Then I did a pediatric dermatology fellowship, which is one reason why the juvenile dermatomyositis question was especially embarrassing. I did the fellowship in Portland, Oregon, and then I just came back home to join the faculty at the University of Utah last year.
So you're back home. You know, I must say that I miss that area, neck of the woods, quite a bit. I did have a college sweetheart that went to West Mini myself. It's like it's very Hogwartsy. I like the campus a lot.
Yeah, it's very nice.
So you chose dermatology, and now you're doing this podcast. But and we know that you do Magic the Gathering, and so you've got a lot going on. You've got hobbies and interests and all this stuff. How do you stay relaxed, and how do you blow off steam and balance? I don't want to say work-life balance, but how do you integrate all of the different aspects of your career and your desires and your growth and you know, just your personality?
Am I allowed to just say whiskey?
Yes, as long as we say drink responsibly, folks. Drink
responsibly. So I also am married and I have 2 little kids. So all of this stuff keeps me very busy.
Sure.
If you have, it sounds like there's some trainees who listen to this podcast. So it's definitely more challenging in residency and in fellowship. And dermatology, you know, gets a reputation for being one of the less intense trainings out there. And certainly I felt like we worked hard, but I have a lot of friends who went into things like OB-GYN and internal medicine, and they say, oh, I just came off of a 30-hour call and stuff like that. And it's true, we don't have to deal with that in dermatology. So it was hard enough, you know, having a new baby and little kids in dermatology residency. So really admire the people who are in other residencies who also go through that issue. I have a lot of support. My family, they love me. At least they seem to. So they keep me feeling good. The dermatology department here keeps me feeling good. And one thing I've discovered is that if you sort of wait to put out your time and effort until something comes along that you really feel passionate about, then the whole experience energizes you rather than enervates you.
So what do you mean? What do you mean by that? You mean wait for your opportunity when you want to pull the trigger on putting yourself out there? Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. When I was graduating fellowship, I was asking some of my mentors what advice they had for a new attending. And the number one piece of advice I got was undercommit. So there's a temptation, I think, especially when you're done training, to go out there and sign up for a bunch of projects and things. And if you have the time and energy, then that's great to do that. What I discovered was that I wanted to focus on the things that I felt passionate about. And major kudos to the University of Utah Department of Dermatology, again, because that seems to be basically their leadership philosophy. Let people decide what they feel passionate about and then encourage them to do it.
Like start a podcast with their nifty state-of-the-art studio.
Exactly.
All right, so really appreciate you coming on the show today. The last thing I want to do is give us some fast facts about Dermasphere. When does it come out? And obviously we can find it wherever podcasts are found, but just when does it come out and what should people expect?
It comes out every 2 weeks. We release it on Mondays. We've got 10 episodes now. And if you're a super fan, you can go to our website and listen to a few of our demo episodes as well. And we usually review about 6 of the latest articles that have come out in the dermatology literature, again, that we think would be most relevant to clinical practice.
And how can listeners interact with you, Twitter, email, if they want you to review a specific article or just want to communicate with you and your co-host?
Our website's a great choice, dermaspherepodcast.com. My co-host, Michelle, is getting a Facebook and Twitter off the ground, so I think it's also Dermasphere Podcast. So those are also options, I think.
Yeah, we'll look into that by the time as we record this. This episode should come out a little after when we record. So if those are out, and we'll have all the information that everybody needs, of course, as I've been saying in the show notes below. Well, Dr. Johnson, I really appreciate you coming on and really impressed by your show.
Thanks. It's been pretty neat.